Well, I've just had to break up a cat fight twice, so I'm starting for the third time. I threw one cat out the door, and this was the one that was being picked on. Roger, you just stick with me, Roger. All right, it was Tuesday, and they'd had breakfast and they were sitting out there in the garden at the stout picnic table that was there, and it's okay, Kitty. And Violet had made coffee Brazilian style. So that's what she liked to do. She'd take a cloth and put it down in a coffee pot and pour coffee ground as fine as flour. It, pour some of that in there and then pour boiling water through it and then wring it. That's a pano de café was what that cloth was called. And it made delicious coffee, and they were drinking that. And they realized there were some decisions to be made. This was a day for it. One, Elaine had to decide whether or not to call, what to say when she called Omar at the Dr. El Hakim at the moot point. Would she go back to work or not? And she'd resolved that she would. She'd give it another try. Violet approved. She said, you can't just let guys like that have their way. You've got to stand up to them as you've shown. So I think you're right. You just can't back away. And Lance, he said he thought that was also probably true, and he would stay an extra day to be there to make sure that that that, that he'd go to work and make with her to make sure that guy, he didn't care how big he was or how many buddies he had, he'd fight him. That's the way he was. And staying the extra day had to do with the other decision. He felt that he was ready to get back on the road, and or almost. And Violet thought so too. What he wanted to do was this day, Tuesday, he wanted to take a long bike ride. He wanted to head west, planning for about 6 hours and ride for 3 hours, and then stop wherever he was, turn around, and then come back to see if he could do that. So he wanted to try that. That was one thing. And if it worked, and if he was able to, then he wanted to, the next day, that would be Wednesday, ride his bike down to the Chesapeake Bay near Deltaville, where Tira had her cottage. Complete his quest, camp out the night there, and then on Thursday, ride his bike back to Richland, if that was okay with them, and stay there with them one more night. And of course they said, well, yeah, of course, obviously. And then Friday, he wanted to get on the road and head back home to Dutch Corner. That was his plan, if he could do each one of those things. So they had that plan. And Lance was about ready to leave when coming up that little alley from Ashland Street back into that kind of courtyard came a couple going along with a little pig on a leash. This was Samantha and Clem. Sammy is what they called, or Sam was what they called the woman, and her husband Clem. They had a pet pot-bellied pig. And Tuesday was their day off, one of their days off, and they usually did take their pig for a walk. So Violet knew them well. So they stopped, and of course this was all a whole new subject of conversation, meeting. The pig's name was Barbie, a little gilt. Her last name was Q, Barbie Q, and she was sweet. And Sammy, the woman, she liked to pick her up and say, she's so sweet, she'll give you a kiss if you want. And Lance said, no, I like pigs, but I'll pass up on the kiss. So anyway, that was all very pleasant, and they had a nice visit. And Lance then got ready to go and left. And that was just as well, because there was more talking to do. After he'd left, then Violet opened up to these neighbors about what Tatus had done, serving her papers and accusing her of assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder, and this couple, they were so horrified that he would do that. He'd done a lot of strange things, but that was so strange. And they said, if you need a character witnesses, we're there for you. The whole neighborhood would be here for you. You don't need to worry about a thing, Violet. And that comforted Violet a little bit, but she was pretty clearly troubled by it. And I pondered, why is that guy so weird? Why would he do stuff like that? And that got Clem going. Sammy and Clem, they didn't rent from Tatus. He owned a lot of property in the spread, but they didn't rent from him. They didn't own the building they were in, and they could say anything they wanted to about him, and he did. He says, that weird old guy, I know what he does with his time. He sits up there in his widow's walk that's up. I'll tell you more about that later. He had a widow walk up on top of his house, and he'd sit up there. I'll tell you about that later. And the other thing I'll bet he does is he just thinks he's such God's gift. I bet he's got some secret room. I can see it now. And he's got a big table and all these little toy soldiers and tanks and stuff. And he plays with them like a little boy, I imagine, and fantasizes that he's Napoleon Bonaparte or Julius Caesar or some great general or something like, or Alexander the Great. And the others, the three women looked at him and said, where are you coming up with this? And he said, I'm just making it up. But he's so weird. I can just see him being like that.